This is the comics alternative for young readers. Reviews of Goodnight Planet, The Dam Keeper, and Misfit City, as well as a look back at 2017 for young readers.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Comics Alternative. I'm Gwen.
And I'm Paul, and we're two academics and educators talking about comics for young readers.
On this episode of the Comics Alternative Young Readers Show, we discuss 3 comics for various ages. First, we take a jaunt through Goodnight Planet by Liniers from TOON Books. It's a sweet comics tale for emerging readers right around kindergarten age about a girl, her dog, and her stuffed animal named Planet. Then we meet the heroes of The Dam Keeper by Robert Kondo and Dice Tsutsumi from First Second. It's an adaptation of an adventurous animated short about a little pig whose sacred duty is to protect a city from a foreboding fog that looms just outside its walls.
And finally, we explore Misfit City, a series written by Kirsten Smith and Kurt Lustgarten, drawn by Naomi franquiz, with colors by Brittany Peer and letters by Jim Campbell from Boom Studios' Boombox imprint. Misfit City is a kind of a Goonies-like adventure about a modern-day Goonies-like pack of teens who live in a town that was actually the location for a movie that was a lot like the Goonies. And so it's going to be a fun ride. Come along and join us. After that, we'll have a little discussion about the year in review, wrapping up Young Readers Comics in 2017 and shouting out some titles.
That's right. So if you're looking for a Hanukkah present, a Christmas present, a Kwanzaa present, an end-of-the-year present for your young reader, this would be a good show for you to listen to. We'll have lots of ideas. But before we start the show, we want to remind everybody that our program is sponsored by Discount Comic Book Service. Head over to dcbservice.com for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. Every week, DCBS has DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse comics for 40% off, and many other publishers' comics regularly run between 20 and 35% off the list price. In fact, DCBS has specials that run 45 to 50% off the cover price, and often the discounts are more impressive than that. So head over to dcbservice.com or to their sister site, In Stock Trades, for all of your comics needs.
That's right. Gwen, one of the ways that I exploit the massive savings to be found at Discount Comic Book Service is that I pre-order the awesome bundles that you can find at significant discounts. As an example, and perhaps appealing to our young readers' audience, there is a DC Kids bundle that includes Teen Titans Go number 26, Scooby-Doo Team Up number 35, and Scooby-Doo Where Are You number 90. Yay, Scooby-Doo! Scooby-Doo! For all those titles for just $4.47, which is 50% off the cover price, or half off, or $8.97 divided by 2, or however you want to put that number sentence. But at DCBS, you can order Dam Keeper, which we're talking about today, from First Second at 30% off for $13.99. And you can find all kinds of other great all-ages comics at incredible discounts.
That is right. And when you do order with DCB Service, be sure to tell them that Paul and Gwen sent you.
That's right. Let them know. Well, Gwen, it's exciting to talk, and first I have to apologize for folks who are hanging on the edge of their seats every month for a new episode of the Young Readers podcast where we review these comics. We had planned to talk about these books that we're talking about today in November, and in fact, you and I did record a conversation about a month ago about these 3 titles. We thank the publishers for providing review copies, and we were excited to talk about them. And then there was this recording snafu, which was entirely my fault. So first off, apologies to listeners for the delay.
Well, we know that everyone understands. I am in the midst of technical difficulties as we speak. As Paul knows, I have 3 computers going at the same time, and hopefully some of them will actually be working. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm working with a cold right now, if you can hear it in my voice. But Gwen, I have to say that one of the highlights of this year, as we near the end of it, for me, has been just joining you in this Young Readers Review podcast that we do every month. It's been tremendous fun, and one of the things I love about it is that it's given me a chance to read some young readers comics, some all ages comics that I might not have otherwise picked up. And one of those is Goodnight Planet, which is our first book that we're going to talk about today. How's that for a segue?
That is a beautiful segue. And likewise, Paul, it's always so much fun to talk to you about comics. So, yeah.
Well, Goodnight Planet is a beautiful book, and I'm glad that we looked at it because my daughter is advancing a little bit past the reading level of this book, but it is one that it's created by Liniers, as you mentioned. It's one of the TOON books line that's edited by Françoise Mouly for emerging readers, and that line has given us, all kinds of wonderful titles like Big Wet Balloon and written and drawn by Henrietta, which were also by Liniers, among other great titles. Liniers is an Argentine, or Argentinian, as some say, creator who's now teaching at the Center for Cartoon Studies in the U.S. And this book is just this sweetly funny, it's got this childlike profundity, and it's a very brief but a very poignant story about Planet. And Planet is a stuffed animal. I think a deer, maybe.
No, it's fawn? A bunny. It's a bunny.
Okay. But whatever it is dearly loved by a little girl who goes to sleep, and Planet wakes up and has a fun adventure with a mouse and a tree and the biggest cookie that you could ever imagine. And so, like I said, it's targeted towards early and emerging readers. It's at the TOON Books level 2. That's for kids around 3 to 4 or up to 7 and 8. And although it's only 36 pages, I think it's a really satisfying adventure that's contained therein. Gwen, what did you think about Goodnight Planet?
Oh, I thought it was beautifully drawn. I was thinking it brought to mind Velveteen Rabbit in some respects. But also, I think it's going to be really exciting for kids because I know when I was little, I always thought, well, when I go to sleep, what do my stuffed animals do, right? Because when you're really little, you have that idea that they're sentient beings and and who knows, maybe they are. If there's a stuffed animal listening right now who's taking offense, I truly apologize. But this book sort of looks at that concept of what happens when this little girl goes to sleep. And that's a bit different because a lot of times, like if you think of the Winnie the Pooh books, you have the child and the stuffed animals engaging in an adventure, right? In this instance, the little girl goes to sleep and now the stuffed animal has like a whole different life, like a whole nother life besides the life that it has with this little girl. And so I really enjoyed the concept of the sort of deep story behind the seemingly innocent and sweet bunny, that it has a fun life otherwise.
Yeah, I felt the same. I think Planet is definitely the focus of the story, but I think it's so important that the first 4 pages of the book, start with a little bit of just the little girl's kind of some of her fun. She's jumping into the leaves, and then also a little bit of her nighttime routine. And it really sets us up for the departure the story takes when she goes to sleep and she says the words "Goodnight Planet," and then Planet's little adventure fires up, because it makes me think about how important it is for kids to have, and this is a lot of having stuffed animals or imaginary friends. My daughter will sometimes plan birthday parties for her stuffed animals or her stuffed friends. And, it's like so important to her imaginative life that there's all these things that go on, not only when she's playing with them, but when she's not. And it's this kind of idea that this world, even a world that you create, goes on without you, and that, people and things don't just exist because you're paying attention to them. It's kind of this, it's kind of an object permanence about living things around you. And so, the story, I think, stokes that imaginative possibility of, hey, when I close my eyes or when I'm not here, where do my imaginative friends go and what do they do? And I think for that, it's a really kind of a nice experience I imagine enjoying having with the youngest readers in your life.
And it's the sort of book that if you're an adult chaperoning a child through comics as they're learning to read them, it's really a beautiful book to look at. The art is beautiful pastel colors, lovely drawings. And so it's pleasurable for the adult. You may see this book a lot. It's one that I could see a child wanting to be read, especially at nighttime. It sort of takes a different take on the Goodnight Moon Bunny, right?
Right.
And so I could see, a child asking to read this book again and again. It is at the level 2 of 3 that TOON Books has. And typically, according to TOON Books, quote, level 2 books are perfect for the first and second graders who are scaffolding their reading skills. Level 2 books feature 1 to 4 panels per page, short sentences and repetition, and about 300 to 600 words. And that's a pretty good characterization of this comic. But all that no child left behind, common core language behind, let's leave that behind. It really is a fun and entertaining book. Yeah. I very much recommend it, and I certainly enjoyed reading it. Yeah.
It's really simple, but awesomely evocative language that really fits with the characters that we come to meet in, a very short amount of time, but they come alive. Planet, a tiny spoiler, but the dog, who is very involved in the story. In fact, Liniers is about the author page, has a picture of what might be their dog, maybe the dog that's in the book as well. And you're right, the art is gorgeous. It does remind me of those old Velveteen Rabbit illustrations. William Nicholson, who's a well-known illustrator, did those illustrations for the original books around the turn of the 20th century, and so it is evocative of that not only in the story but also the illustrations, that classic style of pen art and kind of, as you said, pastelish watercolor that really, in addition to the lettering, which is this kind of capital letters and serif style, it feels very classic. And I think that there is something classic and nostalgic about it that, connects a reader, a young kid that might read this today to, really decades, generations of children's literature along these lines. And so in that sense, it's really quite beautiful, quite connected.
And I really like the size of TOON books. They're smaller than a traditional picture book, which those can get kind of bulky.
Yes.
It's almost the size of a traditional comic book, just a little bit smaller, and it fits nicely in the hands. And so it's if you're sitting with a child on your lap and you're trying to read it, it's not one of those struggles like with a picture book where you're trying to hold the book open and turn the pages. Right. It's also just from a user perspective for a young reader, it's a book that's easy to hold on to and turn the pages and that sort of thing too.
Yeah. I love these books because I just think they're such a great. The great works of children's literature, they're also great primers for comics reading. There's some great sequences of panels where, whether they're, horizontal for good reasons or whatever, they just, well done use of comics.
Yeah. Well, Paul, in addition to our excitement over Goodnight Planet, we both really enjoyed The Dam Keeper by Robert Kondo and Dice Tsutsumi. This is from First Second Books. And both of these guys worked together at Pixar on a number of films, including the Toy Story franchise. So I'm sure most of our listeners are familiar with that. If they're not, well...
Have we got a movie for you?
But before deciding to set up their own production company, Tonko House, that's basically what they did. Robert Kondo was born in Southern California and attended the Arts Center College of Design in beautiful downtown Pasadena, California. And Dice Tsutsumi was born in Tokyo but moved to New York in the early 1990s to attend the very well-known School of Visual Arts. Right. In 2014, the team developed The Dam Keeper, the film upon which this graphic novel is based, and describing the film and their process, Kondo explains that, quote, "The Dam Keeper is an 18-minute animated film that Dice and I wrote and directed together. Our idea was to create a moving painting Our film is about a pig who has the everyday responsibility of saving his town, but the town has no idea of his efforts. Because of his responsibilities, he lives a bit outside of society and is ostracized for it. In fact, this is sort of a text on bullying, in a lot of ways, and the effects of bullying. One day, a fox comes into town and flips the pig's life upside down, who is now put in the position to either open up to the world or close down even more, unquote. In addition to being nominated for an Academy Award for Best Short Animated Feature, The Dam Keeper won a number of awards, including the Toronto International Film Festival Young People's Jury Award and the Audience Award for Short Films from the San Francisco International Film Festival. So when this film came out, it just got a lot of really positive play. The graphic novel we're discussing today is the first of 3 that will be released from First Second Books. According to Tonko House, quote, the story begins 5 years after the events of the short film, with friends Pig and Fox on the cusp of adulthood as the dark cloud that the dam holds back recedes for the first time. They go out into the world in search of answers about the fog as well as the fate of Pig's parents, with the unlikely help of Pig's enemy, Hippo. The film, the comics will explore how friendship evolves as the characters mature. But I do want to say, Paul, that I think it's possible to enjoy this comic series without having seen the film.
Yes.
I know that's true because I have not seen the film and I enjoyed the comic. But I bet that if you had seen the film, it would make even more sense. And
that's
so,
right.
And since it's a 14-minute short that's pretty easily accessible, I think we all owe it to ourselves to go and look at it. But, from an artistic perspective, there's a lot of commonality that I've seen in the stills from the film and from the comic that we read.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the first thing that your eyes take in when you check out this book is what a visual feast it is. And I'm interested in this because we see in comics a lot of influence from a lot of different sources. And, for instance, we just talked about Goodnight Planet, which is really influenced by children's literature and children's books. And, comics are, of course, influenced by other comics and the superhero fare that's out there, but also they get influenced by manga and anime and things like that, and different sources of inspiration. I almost call them visual languages that filter their way and make the mixed language of what we experience in comics. And I think what Dam Keeper is an example of is the ways that this gorgeous and captivating and hugely bankable art that animation has become because of films and video games and CGI and things like that. How does that translate into comics that kids would want to read? How does it speak some really wonderful aspects of that language and still exploit the best of the language of comics? And I think Dam Keeper feels like a great step towards that, because I've seen adaptations, and some of them straight, pictures, stills from the page fit into panels of animated films. I've seen adaptations of animated films that are far less successful than this in terms of carrying over that visual style. I think what the creators here do is they really make crafty use of panels, spacing and size, capturing just the right moment to give the characters that feeling of motion and life and personality without without having the actual movement that animation provides you with. The action feels real, it feels visceral, it feels relatable and understandable. And it's just tremendous use of light and shadow, which is both, makes for gorgeous illustration and also is really important thematically to this story. So I agree with you that it really is gorgeous, visually speaking.
And also one of the things that I think brings it solidly into the world of comics is the handwritten text. And since it's in the first person, we're assuming, I guess, that this is, the pig, right?
Yeah.
And so it kind of, I know it sounds really weird, but it kind of looks like a pig might have written it. It's like, I don't know.
We just watched Babe yesterday, so that's fresh in my mind.
Okay.
I mean, not that he's writing, but
it's all in cap letters, but there's kind of like some shakiness and, that sort of thing. But so it's like, you could believe that this pig could have written this.
That's funny.
But I guess I'd also like to mention the use of color in this text. The way it's used symbolically. Happy memories from the past are orange and glowing. Sad memories from the past are dark and foreboding. There's gorgeous sketches in here, like of the dam that the father has built and or at least has helped to build, and that the son will take over. And there's just some really haunting images. Right. One where the pig is remembering his dad's warning to him about not to go outside the boundary that has been created by this dam. And the father is walking with a face mask, and you don't really see his face. And his son, it was just a little tiny boy at this point, is riding piggyback. Haha, get it? Yeah. On his back with a little sort of face mask on too. Right. And it's a really poignant image. I mean, we're living kind of in a time when a lot of people are wondering, are we heading to some terrible conflict? Where are we heading as a society, et cetera? And I don't know, that image just was really, it was a vulnerable, sweet image, but it also was kind of terrifying. And there's a definite sense of terror in this text in ways that are really moving, not just in that scene, but then when the adventurers go off into the fog, there's a lot of really kind of scary things. So I enjoyed it. It kept my attention, and I just loved the colors and everything. I thought it was beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you have to. I think you can see from the cover image, one, how cute that pig is. so that tells you something about the story. But also, in the first couple pages, it's really enveloped in darkness. In fact, the first lines of the book is "Nothing lives in the fog," which is fairly dramatic. And so there is, a lot of darkness and really even terror that's foreboding. It also sort of sets the characters off on this adventure. And one thing I should say is, I think I like the book a lot. I recommend it, but I do think I'm eager to see more. And I felt like the characterization could have been stronger. There's a lot of the aspects of the characters' personalities. It was distinct. It was evident, but maybe it's just the fog or the action, the story. But I felt like we could have, maybe that the between the dialogue and what we learn about the characters, it still feels a little underformed. But I think, again, as you said, first of 3, and they're just really getting going, embarking on this adventure in this volume. And so I'm really kind of holding off judgment until we kind of see the exploits of the next 2 volumes. But like I said, I think just the visual feast is enough for me to want to be here.
Well, my only concern, and it sort of dovetails with what you just said, is that if I had not read that intro piece by Robert Kondo, I would have thought that these were children. Yeah. They're drawn like children. They're not drawn like teenagers. And even some of the dialogue seems much more childlike. And so, when I think about characters who are on the cusp of maturation, this pig looks like he's just ready for preschool, and so I agree with you. I think that I'll be looking for more development as the series moves on. In fact, I was really disappointed when I got to the end of this and realized that I was only at the end of part 1 and that there were 2 more parts, and I wasn't going to have those for a while, so I got a little grumpy, but as only I can. But I it's worth certainly. I'll be keeping an eye out for the subsequent volumes. And as far as reader age is concerned, Paul, I don't know. I mean, I think probably it's aimed maybe at middle grade and younger. But I could see like your daughter probably enjoying it if you read through it with her. So,
Yeah, I agree. And I think another aspect of the appeal that I would kind of call out is that, like I was saying at the beginning of my response, I think that there's some genres of work where if we told you what the story was about, it might feel a lot like your Nameless Cities or your Amulets or things like that. But I think that, again, because these are folks that come from animation, the way that storytelling rolls out and so on, with far less exposition, a lot of showing and not telling, and really, diving into the world, you can always almost imagine these characters becoming a really awesome video game that you're walking in, with a sort of over their shoulder point of view. And so I think readers who are really versed in animation and in video games are going to find this to speak to them in a lot of levels. Mm-hmm. That me being an old fart with never a gamer, it's a little bit harder for me to connect sometimes. But I think that's just my bias, and so others I think will find this really exciting.
Well, if you're old, I'm ancient, so yeah.
For young reader categories, I'm perpetually old. So.
There we go.
Cool. Well, Gwen, are you ready to get into our next book?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, actually, instead of a book, we're sort of talking about a series. And Misfit City, which is written by Kirsten Kiwi Smith and Kurt Lustgarten, with art by Naomi franquiz and colors by Brittany Peer and letters by Jim Campbell, is a series that I think is going to run through 8 issues. It's been solicited to issue 8, which is out this month.
Right.
You and I read issues 1 through 6, and I believe that this week a collection that features the first 4 issues is coming out. And so, although the series debuted in March, it's set out to be collected. The first four issues, I think the first half of the story is set out to be in a collection this week from Boom. So Misfit City is set in a town that's called Cannon Cove, which was the location for filming of a cult movie classic, The Gloomies, as we mentioned before, obviously a reference to The Goonies. And there are 5 friends who are, all girls or non-binary characters, and they follow the trail of a map that's left by an old eccentric, Captain Denby, who, has died and left behind a treasure chest and so forth to the historical museum. And so the characters are set off on one of these adventures with pirate map and treasure hunt and surly villains and all that. So if it feels like the Goonies, that's all intentional. But really brought to the present day. Wilder is the group's activist and sort of leader. Mace is a cool, snarky musician. Karma is the new agey, reading your aura character. We have Ed, who is comes from indigenous Tillamook folks in this northwest town, and then Dot, who's the book lover. And so you hear in this, kind of a lot of those familiar trappings of a John Hughes style movie, but certainly a lot of change-ups in the characters and the kinds of relationships and issues they confront. So, Gwen, tell us what you thought about Misfit City.
Well, first of all, I guess it reminds me a lot of Scooby-Doo. So if any of our listeners like Scooby-Doo, this has a lot of similarities, including the dog Pippin, who doesn't speak. So that's a bit of a difference, but who is still kind of like one of the gang and
right.
And is there at some important plot points. So I enjoyed that. I did want to talk a little bit. You'd mentioned the Tillamook reference. And I would like to talk a little bit about that for a minute before we talk about the text, because I really feel that the Tillamook who are mentioned in the text are underdeveloped. And for instance, the name that they took themselves was the Nehalem. And they first came to the Oregon coast in the 15th century and were called the Tillamook by the Chinookian peoples who were also living there. And by 1856, the Nehalem nation was forced into the Silits Reservation. And in contemporary times, most people who descend from the Nehalem are now considered to be part of the Silits nation, since so many of them intermarried after they were forced onto the reservation. Actually, as I did research on this myself, I found that the last speaker of Tillamook died in the 1970s, though some linguists have worked to resurrect the language. All of this is to say that the history of the Tillamook is plentiful and detailed and is not really utilized here. The Tillamook serve as one of many references to brown people, whom Black Mary, the pirate character who apparently hid this treasure, knew or employed. The idea that she had cannibals as crew members plays on seafaring cliches and diminished for me some of the other progressive aspects of the text. I will say that. The contemporary character who identifies as Tillamook is Dylan, and she is Edwina, or Ed, as she's known in the text primarily, Ed's former girlfriend. There are some positive points there. She does rightly identify the totem pole that Black Mary references in her pirate map as being inauthentic.
Right.
And she's obviously aware of her own subject position vis-a-vis the non-native people who inhabit Cannon Cove. So I'm not trying to say that it's totally an insensitive portrayal, but it's another one of those instances where I get the sense that it's sort of like being used as a background without as much development, and it would have been nice to have that development. One thing that's really good, I think, about the series, as with Lumberjanes, Dylan and Ed, their relationship is accepted by everybody. No one looks askance upon it. That part is refreshing. And again, very much sort of like the relationship between Mal and Mouly from the Lumberjanes, which also comes out of Boom Studios. So it's not super surprising that the editors there would support that kind of depiction and portrayal. Right. So, from those angles, there are some very positive things. But whenever I see an American Indian nation being mentioned in a text, I want to know more. And in this instance, I think that I would have liked to have seen that more fully developed. The mystery itself, and the sort of the kids trying to, there's a lot of that, hey, you kids get off my lawn, oh, you meddling kids type stuff going on, which, I love, that's total, there's some really vintage, Craigie Captain pirate type stuff going on. It's just, I was expecting the Mystery Machine to just kind of show up. And I know you're more the generation that really enjoyed the Goonies. I was already working in corporate America when the Goonies come out, as I met old. So, I know that you may have some more insight as to how it's referencing that. But for me, I just really felt, sort of the Scooby vibe was there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I do feel that. I mean, I think that although I am the generation for whom Goonies was targeted when I was a kid, I'm also a generation that grew up on Scooby-Doo every day after school while I ate cereal. So I feel like all of those mixed together in the kind of, in the soup, the primordial soup of what this story is. And I do think a lot about how, that generation that grew up in the late 70s and in the 80s are now sort of at their 30s, 40s, and maybe at a certain creative maturity now where they have a substantial voice in the pop culture making of movies and TVs and TV shows and things like that. And so there's a lot of 80s and 90s nostalgia in pop culture right now that's super strong, and the need to resurrect every property that was there when we were a kid. And I'm always curious when I see those kinds of things, which I think you could say that this is sort of one because of the way that it deals with that source text of Goonies. I'm always interested in what kind of transformations you have to make to make it contemporary. I'm cognizant of Goonies as one of the rare places when I was an Asian American kid where I saw an Asian American, kid. Right. And how much that representation to me was, on one hand, really important. Just to see somebody like that. And then two, also something that you would struggle against, full of its own sort of stereotypes and so on. And so I feel like in resurrecting this kind of story and retelling it, there's some really well-worn tropes in there, but to keep those tropes and to reclaim that sense of adventure, but to have it with these characters is something that I just think is a really big project of this generation of storytellers and culture creators. And so it's fascinating as an artifact in that respect. And, it is fun. It's just fun. It's a fun story. So, that I think baseline of entertainment and engagement is there. But I'm also interested, like you, in how these questions of how groups are represented, how peoples are represented, and, what does it mean to have these kinds of stories retold in the, with those things in mind or not in mind, really matter to shaping our consciousness.
Right. It's so funny because I was just listening. On my car, I have Sirius Radio, and there's a channel called Road Trip Nation or something like Road Trip or whatever. And I was listening today, and the announcer came on and said, "This is the channel for kids to show their parents what they're listening to." And they played a song that was contemporary, and then they said, "This is also the channel for parents to show their kids what they listened to when they were younger." So they're that's a really creative way of saying it's 40 years of pop schlock. luck. There you go. Right. But I was laughing because I was thinking about this as we were talking about these things. Two things really came to mind. One is you and I probably have a pretty good understanding of these cultural reference, but there's a lot of kids today, if they're not reading, monthly comics, maybe aren't that into Scooby-Doo, don't know it that much. Certainly the Goonies might be ancient history for them. So they're getting this text as they may be coming to it as a referent-free text, where for them it's just, it is what it is, and it's very contemporary. But, I think that in some ways underscores, for me, the importance of the stories that we are telling, the sort of trope of the pirates and the cannibals, that whole thing. It's just, since Moby Dick, it just makes me want to like bash my head on the table. It's like, and that's just thrown in there, and that's okay. And we're just going to move on from that and not question it. And so, that did kind of bug me, but in other ways, I thought it was a really progressive comic. And a lot of the issues that the kids are raising, adults don't want to hear about, or they have their own problems. And that felt actually pretty genuine to me. And so I think this is one of those series that I'm going to continue to follow, because I'm interested in the character development and a lot of these ideas. And who knows, maybe the comics creators will prove us wrong, and we'll end up, at the last couple issues, pulling this in a direction that would probably make folks a little bit more comfortable. But I don't know. There were some parts of it that I thought were edgy and funny, and certainly the commentary on modern music making, band mates, and the way that they can be frustrating and that sort of thing. There's a lot going on in this comic, and some of it is really funny. So, and the inevitable kid who's trying to get good grades to go to college, and all that kind of stuff is going on. So there's a lot. There's something for everyone in this comic in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hear you on sort of this, and actually a lot of series from Boom, I get the same feeling, are these creations of trying to make cultural touchstones, I think, between a thin generational divide between, I think the storytellers maybe in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and, a generation just maybe 5-10 years younger, like stories that you write for people who aren't distant, of an altogether different era, but whom you want to inculcate in some of the great things that you loved, and to tell stories that you would love to see. And so in some of that, you see you see, like, I think young progressive people can see themselves in it. And in some ways, it still reveals the ways that the work continues, as you were saying, just in terms of how we inform ourselves and how we try to be informed, and when it comes to representing, like you were talking about the Tillamook people. But I do think that there's something interesting going on. As I read it, it's really well drawn. My hat's off to the creators. I thought about when I was a kid, and there was that book, How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way. Did you ever see that?
Yes.
I want to say it was like Sal Buscema or something like that. But it was sort of a Bible of like, oh, here's the sort of post-Kirby way that comics are drawn, and probably 3/4 of those rules don't apply when it comes to these types of stories. And I would just be so fascinated by a gathering of artists like I'm thinking of Brittany Williams, or I'm thinking of the Lumberjanes artists, or I'm thinking of Max Sarin, who does Giant Days, or Alyssa Trayman, and just like almost How to Draw Comics the Boom Studios way, which is certainly not one way, but what are the finer points of storytelling that involve the kind of character acting and scene setting and action dynamics that are native to these kinds of stories? I think that is something I'd really like to kind of study up and see more.
Or maybe we need to write an article. See, there you go.
Sounds fun. I'd love it. I'm in.
This is how academics keep things going. That's right. Just like this. I sort of have this intuition of something that I see is sort of like this. That's exactly how most of my articles start. So there you go.
Right. Right. Peek behind the curtain of academic Yeah.
Well, when you're writing about comics, you're pretty much on your own, so it's not surprising. But no, that's true. I think that there's definitely a style aesthetic that is being developed, but also a subject matter aesthetic. And and you can definitely see it. This is you. I could look at this, and if you said who published this, I would be able to say it's Boom. I mean, there's just something about the way that the characters are drawn and the settings, the backgrounds, the discourse, everything has that feel. So if you like the Lumberjanes, you'll definitely like this series for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, we recommend that you check it out.
Well, Paul, here we are nearly at the end of 2017.
Yeah. Oof.
I know. It has been quite a year.
It has been. It has been.
And I was going over some of the comics that we've talked about on the show that I wanted to reemphasize, but there's also at least one that we didn't talk about just because of timing issues I want to recommend. But why don't we start with you? Both Paul and I decided we'd come up with a list of 5 or so comics that we just thought really stood out in 2017, and that we'd chat about those a little bit, especially if you're in the gift-giving mood this time of year. It's always fun to have some suggestions. So, Paul, why don't we start off with your list? What would you put on your list for Santa?
Sure. First of all, I think
Paul's I don't believe in Santa, Gwen.
We've disabused our daughter of that notion already, but
okay.
She still does get gifts, and certainly a lot of graphic novels. So
that's right.
I think, well, I gotta start with this. My favorite thing in all ages comics this year is that I got to do this podcast with you, Gwen.
Aww.
We started in February. We miss Andy Wolverton,
we do,
as we always say, but this has been a real privilege, and so. I think when I was thinking through, especially the not mentioned things this year, I also thought through the things that we did talk about this year, Gwen. And I mean, the greatest gift and treat for me has been being able to do this. But for every book that we got to talk about, I think there was something that we didn't. And so I just wanted to shout out some of those things. If you'll indulge me in my list.
We will.
All right. So we did get to talk about Swing It Sunny from Jennifer and Matthew Holm, which was really fun. And I think it, exists in that space that things like El Defo and Raina's books created. And I don't know if you read Brave by Svetlana Chmakova. I think you reviewed Awkward, maybe.
I did review Awkward. I have Brave on my bookshelf. I have not read it yet.
Yeah, I actually liked it even better than Awkward.
Oh, cool.
And my daughter and I really enjoyed that. That was a good one this year that I really appreciated. We also got to talk about Stoneheart, which is the second book of Faith Erin Hicks's Nameless City series. And it's speaking of the space that titles like Bone and Amulet have created. I thought that Mighty Jack and the Goblin King this year was it was solid Ben Hatke stuff, but the ending, and I don't know if you've seen this, but and I won't give it away for people who haven't yet, but the ending will knock you over. And there's been some announcements that are related to that ending. So what I encourage folks to do, if they don't know anything of what I'm talking about, is go read Mighty Jack 1 and 2, especially if you're a Ben Hatke fan. And what's unveiled at the end of Mighty Jack and the Goblin King will set you up for what's next. Gwen, do you know what I'm alluding to here, or
I don't, because I haven't. Okay, so I have to tell everyone I'm in the middle of. Yes. Well, I'm actually finishing up a book on children's comics, and what happens when you're writing on a subject is that you don't have time to read practically anything else, and it's so depressing. And it's funny because as I've been writing this book, I've sometimes swapped out books as I've continued to read for this podcast, and for I do try and keep up, but it's so funny because now that you've said that, I'm like, oh no, do I need to go back to my Hatke section and change that?
Revise.
But I'm in that kind of weird place where next year I'll be able to read a lot more, but this year I'm just sort of in that place where I'm trying to tread water with what I've already got. So okay. I'm in that challenging space, as they say.
Gotcha.
But now you've picked my interest, so of course I'm going to go and I have it on my bookshelf as well, but I haven't read it.
Awesome.
So Yeah.
Well, Gwen, pessimistically, I'm going to frustrate you even more, but maybe optimistically, I'll get you whet your appetite for your reading list this coming year with some of these others. I know that you have, though, been reading Secret Coders, which is another series that I think, the first two volumes were great, but the third and fourth, which came out this year, just blew it out of the water. I mean, things got connected, and Gene Yang and Mike Holmes just doing their coding thing to make coding like fun and fascinating, and I just am blown away. We with my daughter and my wife, we indulged in a little bit of Secret Coders catch up this weekend, which was really phenomenal. But yeah, again in that camp, I just will shout out Knife's Edge as well, which is Hope Larson and Rebecca Mock's second volume of the Compass South series, which we also didn't get to talk about. But we also talked about Real Friends by Shannon Hale and Li Wen Pham, and Newsprints by Rushu, and Pashmina by Nidhi Chanani, and those were some really fun books. And I think if those were ones that appealed to you, folks I think I've been talking about Victoria Jameson's All's Fair in Middle School, but I also would recommend a book that I didn't see get as much play, although it came out from First Second by Sharon Shin and Molly Ostertag, called Shattered Warrior, which was, I think it may be familiar to people in terms of the kind of adventure, and I think it is for an older kid audience, maybe a teenage audience with some of the content in there, but I enjoyed that too. I think it had a lot of promise as the start of a series. And finally, we've talked about some of these on the podcast, but we discussed the best we could do, Gwen, you and I, and Spinning, I think, is another book for older readers. We're probably talking here about adolescence, that I think was a powerful book along the same lines that T. Bowie's Best We Could Do was, and Spinning by Tilly Walden. And finally, just want to mention, my list is super long, I'm sorry. I actually have more, but I'm going to leave some out. But I just want to mention that we talked about Ben Sears' Volcano Trash, which was just really fun adventure comics. And for people that those appeal to, I want to recommend Rich Tomaso's Spy Seal.
Oh, yes, I love Spy Seal.
Yeah, so much fun. Kind of Tintin style with animal characters, kind of adventure spy story. And then finally, Greg Pak and I'm going to mess up his name. I think it's Miyakashi. I got to look up his name and correct that. But Mech Cadet U from Boom is also a really great series that people should check out.
Well, we have a little bit of an overlap and some interesting segues. Like, for instance, you were talking about Shattered Warrior. A book that I really want to recommend is The Witch Boy. And it's Molly Knox Ostertag's first solo novel out of graphics. And it's a great, great read. It's about a young child who is growing up in a society where girls become witches and men become shapeshifters. But this particular character called Aster has a deep, deep interest in witchcraftery, I guess. I don't know. In witch lore and that sort of thing, even though technically his family feels that he is supposed to be a easy for me to say, shapeshifter. And it's really well done. And I just think Molly Knox Ostertag is on the verge of becoming just a superstar in young adult comics. And so I really recommend Witch Boy. It's really a good comic. The other comic that I want to talk about that Derek and I actually did an interview with Andy Hirsch on was his science comics volume on dogs. Yeah. And, okay, first of all, I love dogs, although my dog is driving me crazy today because he literally ate one of my shoes. I know that's like such a trope, and people say, my puppy was chewing on my shoe. Well, this happened today, and it was my favorite pair of shoes. And I'm trying not to be like super angry about it, but it's so funny because I'm just reminding myself, go back to the dog's book. It explains puppy behavior, you know. So if you love dogs, or if your dog is driving you nuts, I recommend out of First Second Books, Andy Hirsch's Dogs volume from my very favorite series there. I just love the science comic series. It's so awesome.
It is.
And then definitely want to second Real Friends, Shannon Hale and Liuan Pham's wonderful book out of First Second. It's such an interesting treatment of the way that, one of the things that I think we forget as adults, where our lives become so complicated and we have so much going on, is that little kids feel that way too. It's just that their universe is typically smaller. And so what happens in their interpersonal relationships is so significant. And this text really looks at the concept of friendship and what a real friend is. And I just recommend it for all readers. I think it's I know that Shannon Hale is kind of miffed because a lot of people are arguing, oh, it's a great girls book. And she's really been trying to have us work away from that. And I agree with her 100%. This is a book that I think any child would enjoy. And I think we have to stop genderizing our texts in the way that we do in this culture. Just because it's written by a woman, it's a memoir to a certain extent based upon her own experiences, doesn't mean that there isn't value for all kids who could read it. So really want to push that book forward if we have any parents listening especially. I think probably the best that we could do is the best comic I read this year. Pretty much hands down. And especially as someone who was a child during the Vietnam War and sort of my first information on that war was actually from nightly news reports as opposed to any kind of interviews with individuals who were part of the conflict in Vietnam, indigenous to Vietnam, etc. I really appreciated this text. It filled in a lot of gaps for me. It made me realize things I hadn't thought about, but also just in terms of the parent-child relationships, there was so much truth there that's universal about parents and children and their interactions. And so I just felt it was a powerful, beautifully drawn book that opened my eyes to the experience of individuals who lived through the war or came to the United States as immigrants, and at a time when our country is behaving not particularly well towards immigrants, when we are a nation of immigrants. I think this book couldn't have come out at a better time, and if you haven't yet read it, you really need to get a hold of that. And A Different Pond, too, which we illustrated. And, oh, God, who's the author? I'm having a blank.
Balfi.
Balfi, thank you. Really wonderful picture book / I guess you'd call it hybrid, that we talked about, and that a lot of my friends have been using it in their children's lit classes, and really positively. A lot of really positive feedback from our college students, and it's so important that we expose them to all sorts of books before they go off into the school districts. And so many of my friends have said that their students loved A Different Pond. So. And then finally, I will just mention Pashmina as well. I really liked it. It's if you liked, I'm thinking of a couple books. Like if you really liked Coraline by Neil Gaiman and the graphic novel version of that, or if you really liked, what's the Anya's Ghost by Vera Broskel. Pashmina is that kind of book for you. I think it deals with a young woman coming to terms with her parents' decisions when they immigrated to the United States. And it's just a beautifully drawn, fascinating text. I really enjoyed it. And that's Midi Chinani, and that's out of First Second Books as well. So as usual, my list is very heavily First Second. But there were lots of great comics this year.
So many.
And it's kind of sad because, like, in past years when we've done this, I've had so much more time to read that I have a lot. It's a more agonizing decision, and there's a lot of text. This year, this wasn't hard, as it turns out, or difficult for me because I had a somewhat more shallow pool. I had a different pond of my own this year. It was much more shallow, and so it was easier for these to come right up to the top. But it has been a great year, and there's a whole bunch of texts that I have on my to read in 2018 list just to try and get caught up. So,
well, one of the things we did also this year, and listeners can listen back, is we talked about all the Eisner nominees from last year in the young readers categories, the 3 categories. That was a heck of an episode, Gwen, where it was a marathon discussion, but we got to really look at the top of the field. And if you would just permit me, if folks would just indulge me for 3 more quick mentions, because I think these are things that will maybe wind up back in that list along with many of the other things we've talked about. One is that I love Nightlights, which is something that you
Yes.
and I reviewed by
Yeah.
Lorena Alvarez. That
Right.
art was so beautiful. And it reminds me of of another book that I've read this year from First Second from Joris Chambellan called Cece's Journal, which heavy with text, but also beautiful, beautiful art that folks should definitely check out. So that's one I wanted to mention. Another one is that there's a book called I Am Alfonso Jones. Did you hear about this?
Yeah, I have
Gwen?
actually.
Yeah, from Lee and Low Books, and it came out not too long ago, actually, a couple of months ago. But it's a graphic novel that really takes on the police shootings that have compelled the Black Lives Matter movement, and it's a story about a young actor who's preparing to play a role in Hamlet, who is accidentally shot by police. And so very, very powerful book by Tony Medina and Stacey Robinson and John Jennings. And I think that's one that folks should definitely also check out. And I think we'll get some consideration next year as well when we look back at the comics that really made an impact. And the last thing that may get Eisner mentioned is this major book that came out this year in our field called Graphic Novels for Children and Young Adults, a collection of critical essays edited by Michelle Annabate and Gwen Tarbox, our very own Gwenethine Tarbox, which was a collection we had a round table about, and I have just continued to enjoy throughout the year. So again, listeners of this podcast who haven't checked out the volume that you were an editor of, Gwen, really should, because it's got some phenomenal essays about readings and readers, comics and texts, and classrooms. And I think it's
Is it sad
fantastic.
that I'm so busy and overworked that I was like, oh yeah, that book.
That happened.
That did happen. But I will say it's nice that the one thing I like about having that book out is now when someone says, "Oh, I really like that comic," there's usually an article that I can say, "Oh, well,
Right.
read that article." And so we were
right.
really honored, I should say. Truly, I want to emphasize that so many wonderful authors came forward, wrote such beautiful pieces, and it's 21 chapters, which is kind of longer than your typical edited collection, but it's packed with really commentary on some of the top comics of the last 10 years. And really a lot of fun for us to edit because the essays were so excellent. And I'm just really proud of that work that our authors did for the collection. And so thank you, Paul, for reminding me of that. And yes, definitely encourage folks. And it's coming out. I do want to let you know it is coming out in paperback very soon.
Awesome.
It was originally released as most academic texts are in hardback, but we had heard from the publisher a couple months ago that it will be coming out very soon in paper, and that's going to be a definite cost savings. And also, honestly, I just prefer paperback books. If I'm going to read a real book, I tend to go mainly digital when I can with scholarship. But if I'm going to read a book in the real world, I really prefer a softback anyway. So it's exciting that will be out very soon. So
Yeah. And a little shout out to Charles Hatfield and Crystal Howard, who we had a nice discussion with about Young Readers Comics earlier in this year. And folks can check out that at comicsalternative.com, where all our past episodes are. And I sound like I'm wrapping things up. No,
but you are.
It truly was a great year. And I'm looking forward to more next year, and continuing to read and cover all this great stuff with you, Gwen.
Yes. And when I turn in my manuscript, I'll have a lot more time to read and everything else. And that will be a good thing. So
we'll celebrate. That's
yes,
right.
We will celebrate that. When freed up to read. Yay. Well, this has been a wonderful time today, Paul, and I think we've given our listeners lots of things to think about with some of these new releases and the 2017 best of that we did in a sort of abbreviated form. Well, folks, if you are interested in getting your comics at a deep discount, we would encourage you to go to our sponsor, DCB Service, or their sister company, In Stock Trades. There you're going to find lots of amazing comics priced at 30% off or even more. After you do get your comics there, get in touch with us and let us know what you think of these books. We love to hear from you. You can contact us by going to our website at comicsalternative.com. There you can contact us in a number of ways, and this is true, and I'm still waiting for someone to show us contacting us simultaneously in all of these ways. If you or your young reader would like to leave us a spoken message, you can record a message through our website on SpeakPipe, which you can find on the banner of the website, or you can call us the old school way at 415-3-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
Or you can email us. The podcast is at 2guys, TWOGUYS, at comicsalternative.com. Or you can reach out to us individually. Gwen is Gwen at comicsalternative.com, and I'm Paul at comicsalternative.com. And we're also all over social media.
All
we're
over
on Twitter.
We are all over
everywhere. You name it. On Twitter at the number 2 guys with PhDs. And also you can find the Comics Alternative by searching on Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, Slack. We have a Slack channel, if you know what that is.
I do, because I said I would join it. So yeah.
That's right. You can subscribe to the podcast at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, TuneIn, iHeartRadio. We have a YouTube channel. You can support us on Patreon if you search us out at Comics Alternative. And as always, you can find every single one of our episodes, our reviews, our interviews, all of our wide-ranging comics coverage at comicsalternative.com.
Whoa. There's no way that you could say you cannot find our exciting podcasts, because they are everywhere. Well, Paul, it's been a great 2017 in terms of spending time with you and talking about comics, and I'm looking forward to next year.
That's right. Everybody have a good holiday.
Yes, have a safe, happy holiday. See you soon.
Happy New Year.